Mike Wallace has died. Mike Wallace, the legendary, and I don't use that word lightly, legendary talk show host, correspondent for 60 Minutes, really a giant in the broadcast news industry. Was 93 years old. His son Chris, of course, is the host of Fox News Sunday. Mike Wallace has died. He has been ill for a while, but still somehow the news coming as a shock. And so I'm going to turn to our panel here. Let me briefly introduce everybody. David Zurich, sitting over here, we haven't had time even to go over the introductions, is the television and media critic for the Baltimore Sun. In Los Angeles, Sharon Waxman is the founder and editor-in-chief of TheWrap.com. And in New York, Marisa Guthrie, senior reporter for The Hollywood Reporter. And let me start with you, Mr. Zurich. It's hard to overstate Wallace's importance because his career lasted so long and he did so many different things.
Yeah. You know, Mike Wallace is one of the people, when you think back, born 1918, that's before radio, really. That's how long he's been there. He is one of the true pioneers of American television. You know, we take all of these things about television for granted, being in the living room, but it's people like him who not only made television the medium it is, but made television journalism the force it is in American life. He is a key part of CBS News when it was the giant. And more, I think back to that era. Look, he was not a great journalist when he came to CBS News.
He was a talk show host.
Yes, he was. Yeah. And all of that's wonderful about him. He brought all those skills there. But he worked with great journalists, and he found a great producer in Don Hewitt. And the two of them, their mentor and his tormentor, I think is the way he once referred to him. He's my mentor and my tormentor. And it's absolutely true. Mike Wallace really is how you can't overstate what a giant this guy was.
At the same time, Sharon Waxman, he was controversial, did a lot of controversial stories. His techniques were sometimes controversial. But what was also remarkable is he continued to work, even after several announcements that he was retiring, cutting back, you know, well into his late 80s.
Yeah, that was kind of amazing. I mean, we all can track our lives as journalists a bit against the career of Mike Wallace, and he just never seemed to age. He never seemed to flag. I do think that's why it's so sad for those of us who grew up kind of aspiring to do great journalism, because Mike Wallace was always there, and that kind of stamina. I mean, I met him and got to know him when he was in his 80s, and he was going strong. So, I mean, there's also like a whole generation of journalists who were executive producers for him, who learned from him, and who went out into the world and have done great journalism on television since then. And the important thing, I think, especially on this show to mention, is that this is the kind of journalism that television so rarely does. This is what 60 Minutes established as this enormously credible and enormously important and enormously profitable center of journalism on television. It is unparalleled, as you know, on television now. There's no show that comes close to it. And Mike Wallace really epitomized that show.
And Marisa Guthrie, Wallace began his career in the 1950s as a talk show host on a program called Night Beat. Then he was there in 1968 when CBS created what was the first news magazine show, 60 Minutes, and really, along with Morley Safer, Ed Bradley, and others, but Mike Wallace really became the face of that program.
Yeah, and I think that his death sort of reminds us how rare these brands are in TV news. I mean, 60 Minutes has been on for more than 60 years. And as Sharon said, I mean, they continue to do amazing journalism. And I think it's a reminder of how hard it is to really launch brands like that now. And, you know, that that his passing and the passing of Andy Rooney, too, earlier, is just, it's an end of an era in television news.
I knew Mike Wallace reasonably well. I talked to him a couple years ago on the phone, even though he was ill and had some trouble remembering things from long ago. His voice was very strong, that unmistakably strong voice. He once interviewed me for 60 Minutes, and he was a pit bull, as you might imagine. And he was on this program once, and a couple times, actually. And I pressed him about, why are you still doing this? He was probably, you know, 82 at the time. You know, why are you still getting on and off airplanes? And he made pretty clear, I mean, he joked around about it, but like, this is what he did. He didn't want to give it up. He really had this passion for journalism. But at the same time, David Zurich, more than anything else, particularly in the early decade or two of 60 Minutes, he became known for the confrontational ambush interview in which he or others would go up to some bad guy, somebody who wouldn't talk to the program, and confront him on the street. That later fell out of favor, and even Wallace, I think, you know, moved away from that at a certain point.
Mike was the archetype, and it was vital, and it had all the energy of an archetype, and it created this notion of, you know, you see all the phony versions of it now. We're on your side, we're the I-team, blah, 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 and you know, like any archetype, it loses its energy. When he did it, when they did it, it was powerful, and it was how he always, you mentioned, just said this about him, he stood for a tenacious kind of journalism, and he also an accountable kind of journalism. I remember interviewing him a while ago about the Malcolm X interview, you know, and we went at it, and he stood in there and he defended it, and he made a great argument for, within the context of that period, the interview he did. This is really a guy you have to admire.
I once reported, though, where he had gone too far and conducted a hidden camera interview with another reporter who thought she was just providing some background information for 60 Minutes. He was reprimanded by CBS for that, and he called me a bad name, but he did it in a good-natured way. Sharon Waxman, some other thoughts about the impact of this man's career? I mean, it's hard to avoid the use of superlatives only because he did it. He did it for so long, and he did high-impact stories and interviewed everybody from, you know, presidents to, he once asked Ayatollah Khomeini whether he was crazy.
Good question.
Right. He interviewed Ayatollah Khomeini all the way through Ahmadinejad at the end, which sort of gives you a sense of his longevity and his ability to sustain, you know, those really hard-hitting interviews. I mean, his mental strength, I mean, really, all the way through till he retired was something that was really remarkable. I'll just recall, the first time I met him in person, he was stripped to he was bare to his shorts and walked in glowing. It was on a summer day on the East Coast and on Martha's Vineyard. I was at someone's house, and I met him, and he came in and he immediately started peppering me with questions. Who was I? Where was I at? What was it? Where did I come from? You know, he was just a natural interviewer, and he had this dazzling smile. He was late in his 80s. He was just a remarkable person.
Force of nature. Final thought, Marisa Guthrie?
Well, I think that, you know, the ambush interview, I mean, he did later in his career kind of distance himself from those, but I think it also underscores how few interviewers can actually get to the heart of a question, the heart of a matter, and really ask the difficult, tough questions and not give up after one follow-up, but really kind of keep going in there and hammering, and Mike epitomized that, and it's rare now.
He certainly did. Mike Wallace, dead at 93, remarkable man, remarkable career, and we have just learning about this, as I say.